Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The Research Institute of the Finnish Economy, ETLA, welcomes you to our seminar on globalization, What's the Story Now? My name is Tytti Sulander and I'll be your guide here today. I will lead you through this exciting afternoon that takes you through the years of globalization. Program you'll see right here. I would also like to remind you that we are live streaming this event in the internet, real time, and it can also be watched afterwards on ETLA webpage and on YouTube. And then we have a hashtag, InSource, which means when you tweet, and we do recommend that you tweet, you can use this hashtag. And you can also use ETLA hashtag. This seminar will focus on the technological drivers of globalization, how they interact with institutional and political factors in shaping the ways production is globally organized. And then, of course, we focus on Finland, how Finnish economy developed during phases of globalization. In ETLA, we are very pleased to see you so numerous here today. Thank you all for coming. We apologize for this inconvenience or troubles finding seats. This beautiful place is quite crowded at the moment. We do apologize, but we are happy about it, of course. We do hope that you all will have a great afternoon enjoying the debate. And I don't know anybody better to open this event than Mr. Jorma Ollila, Chairman of the Board of ETLA, among other things. It's a great pleasure to welcome you on stage, please.
Thank you, Petri. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the seminar, which has been organized by ETLA, the Research Institute of Finnish Economy. Globalization has been in considerable headwinds over the past few years. On the one hand, many indicators suggest that the period of very rapid deepening of global economic interaction is over, at least temporarily. The growth of global trade has decelerated to the level of global GDP growth. Foreign direct investment flows have stagnated, and the number of trade restrictions has increased. More importantly, the perception that globalization is harming rather than benefiting a large fraction of citizens has gained currency in many developed countries. This perception has been reflected in the popular support of politicians who openly challenge the received wisdom that free trade and the governance of international economic relations through multilateral institutions is in the interest of all nations. Brexit and the election of Donald Trump as the US president are the clearest manifestations of such change in the political mood. At the same time, there's no cessation of technological advancement that is continuing to reshape the conditions of economic activity, including the opportunities for trade. The improvements of information technology were a key driver, if not the key driver, of the emergence of global value chains during the last 25 years. Artificial intelligence and the steps towards genuine telepresence and telerobotics may well change the environment fundamentally again. The competitive positions of various countries, or perhaps better, the resources located in their jurisdictions, are likely to undergo further positive radical changes. So it's not at all clear what the global economic interactions will look like, say, in 5 or 10 years from now, and what the evolving environment might mean for a small country like Finland. This seminar aims at shedding light on exactly these questions. Our keynote speaker is Professor Baldwin. It is hard to think anybody better suited to discuss the general trends in international economic interactions and the associated policy challenges than Professor Baldwin. He is one of the leading experts on globalization globally. He is, since 1991, Professor of International Economics at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva, and also the President of CEPR, Center for Economic Policy Research, a leading network of economists interested in economic policy. Richard Baldwin did his undergraduate studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, obtained his Master's of Science degree at the London School of Economics, and PhD degree from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, where Paul Krugman was his thesis supervisor. Apart from the Graduate Institute, Mr. Baldwin has taught and done research at the Columbia University, MIT, and Oxford. He's an author of numerous articles in the leading economic journals and other publications. Last year, Mr. Baldwin published The Great Convergence, Information Technology, and the New Globalization. In his book, he analyzes the different phases of globalization, their drivers and outcomes, and the challenges policymakers are currently faced with. Larry Summers has written that this book is among the best books ever written about globalization, in the same league as the Keynes's The Economic Consequences of Peace and Kindleberg's Manias, Panics and Crashes. Incidentally, some of the key elements of the analysis in the new book saw the daylight 11 years ago here in Helsinki, where Mr. Baldwin presented a paper which he had written for a globalization project organized by the Finnish Prime Minister's office. So, in a way, Professor Baldwin returns to the crime scene, and we are very eager to witness the new episode in the globalization story. The keynote is complemented by two shorter presentations. First, ETLA's Managing Director Vesa Vihriälä discusses how Finland's economic development fits into Baldwin's broad analysis of the different phases of globalization. The presentation shall give us an overview of the new book Vesa and his colleagues at ETLA have put together. The book, Riding the Wave, Finland in the Changing Tides of Globalization, is available free of charge to all seminar participants. I think many of you are sitting on it at the moment. Please enjoy reading it later. The third presentation is one where ETLA Tieto's Managing Director Petri Rouvinen gives us the gist of another new book, which deals with outsourcing in Sweden and Finland. This book summarizes the findings of a joint Finnish-Swedish project on the theme. Finally, we will have a panel discussion in which the audience is most welcome to participate. Economists instinctively think that trade in its different forms is a good thing. Sometimes this belief has left us to overlook the fact that the benefits come with adjustment costs and may not be shared by all. Some may suffer as well without appropriate policies. While I see no reason to reconsider the basic tenet of economic theory about the role and importance of economic openness, the recent backlash against globalization is a reminder to all of us that managing transitions well is of paramount importance. But how to do it well is a difficult question and requires a deep understanding of the underlying forces and their likely impacts. The purpose of this seminar is to help us all grasp better what's going on and what challenges are going forward and what policy options we do have. Once more, welcome to the seminar, and please, Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, Well, thank you for those kind words of introduction, Mr. Chairman. Today, what I'm going to try and do is change the way you think about globalization. Partly because I think many policy choices, not so much in Finland, but other countries, but Finland as well, are misdirected by a misunderstanding of what trade really is, what globalization really is driven by, in no country more than the United States at the moment. But before I go to that big challenge of changing how you think about globalization in 40 minutes, I want to talk about where this came, just to reflect a little bit on what the chairman did. This whole line of thinking, which I used to call globalization, the great unbundlings, first got started in 2006. I presented the paper not very far from here. There was a hall down there with the government, when Vesa was working in the Prime Minister's office. And I had done a lot of work on globalization in the 90s, thinking about it the old way. And I got tired. I wrote a paper that had a lot of echo called Two Ways of Globalization. And I, in this profession, they ask you to write the same paper again and again and again. And at some point I just said, no more globalization. And then, but around 2006, people started feeling that globalization was acting differently. This was not the 1970s, it was not the 1980s, it wasn't the 1990s. And Vesa, who was then working in the Prime Minister's office when Finland had the presidency of the EU, I think the first time, asked me to do it, and I said no, and then he asked me again, and I said no, and asked me the third time, and my wife accepted from me. Now, the reason I want to go through that is first of all, I think it was really an inspiration to make me rethink my thinking, and so in some sense I'm in a debt to that being forced it. The other is I want to explain this ugly tie that I have here. This was the tie that was given to all people at the first Finnish Prime Minister's presidency in 2006. And I think it was supposed to be a design, Finnish design thing. But you don't see many people wearing them. But I thought I thought I could wear it today somewhat appropriately. So let me use it. Okay, so let me get started on this. Globalization, what's the story now? So as I said, I want people to think differently about globalization. In particular, I want people to think more broadly about globalization. Because globalization changed. Perhaps in Finland, you're a little closer to that than in many large countries where they managed to go through the different waves with most people not knowing what's going on. And we have the chairman of Nokia here, so I think the notion that globalization changed, I don't think it needs to be brought home too much. But what I want to do is start by convincing you that globalization changed twice in the long history. But most of today, what I really want to do is argue that globalization is going to change going forward very quickly. And I think it will be very disruptive to society going forward. I'm writing another book right now called The Robotics Upheaval, and I'm quite convinced that the changes that are coming to the service sector by globalization and automation will be very socially disruptive. And I'll get to that at the end of it all. But what I want to do is argue that all this makes sense as long as you think about globalization in a broader perspective. So let me start arguing that globalization changed a couple times. Globalization changed radically twice. So this is, I outsource these to Thailand, and so they're very nice slides. But the way they all work is I'm going to read the top there, like an adult literacy exercise. I'll read out loud while you read along. And then you don't have to look at the slide again, you can look at me. So that's the way this is all going to look like that. So here we have shares of world income, and I'm going to track two groups of countries, China and India, and it goes back to the year 1000. This comes from Angus Madison data. And back in the year 1000, China and India had about half the world's GDP because they had about half the world's population. And back then, everybody was basically poor and agrarian. Almost everybody was on the brink of starvation. So your share of GDP was your share of population. And here's the G7, the four big European countries, France, Germany, Italy, the UK, the US, and Japan, and somehow or another Canada got in there. Maybe the US was lonely, I'm not sure. But here's the G7, down about 11%, and in 18 centuries, very little changed. And most of this growth there was the population of the Americas with Europeans, who then put some people into Canada and the US. Around 1820, something radically changed. Modern globalization started, and it started to create the world we live in today, where most countries are poor and a few countries are fabulously rich. And you can see here the G7 share of global GDP went from about a fifth up to 2/3 by 1990, over 170 years, and China and India's share plummeted. Now, since 1990, this is reversed. That's the title of my book, The Great Convergence. The share of GDP in the G7 world share went from about half to from about 2/3 to under half, and now it's back to where it was in 1900. And China and India are coming back up very quickly. Now, the problem, I believe, with most economic thinking, much government thinking, and many corporate thinking, is all of our mindsets, our mental models, our perspectives on globalization were developed when the green dots were rising. Ricardo did his thing 200 years ago this year. He's 200 years old today. And Helpman and Krugman, Heckscher, Lean, all these models, the way we think about globalization, were developed when the green dots were rising. And many people, like say the Trump administration or the May's administration, are trying to think through the falling green dots using the mindsets that help them explain the rising green dots. And I would submit to you that they're probably missing something, and they most definitely are. I launched this book in Washington, D.C., 7 days after the election of Trump, which was tremendously good for my book. Not so much for the world. Okay, now, what I want to do is simplify to clarify. I want to present a very simple thought paradigm for globalization, which hopefully will help you reorganize the way you think about why those changes happened and how the changes are going to go forward. I'd like you to think of globalization as arbitrage. Arbitrage happens when things cost different amounts in different places. And there's a two-way buy low, sell high deal there. That's trade. But I'd like you to think about arbitration in goods, knowledge, and people. And the primary mindset that Ricardo gave us 2 centuries ago is about goods. And when people talk about globalization is going too fast and they want to slow it down, they talk about putting up barriers to movement of goods. But I would argue that, at least in the last 2 decades, the movement of knowledge has been far more important, and putting tariffs up against Chinese goods will not stop the movement of knowledge across borders, and therefore will have very unintended consequences. That's the primary mistake. Going forward, I think it's going to be people. So let me be a little clear about that. Globalization as arbitrage is constrained by 3 costs. Trade costs, which is the cost of moving goods, communication costs, which is the cost of moving ideas, and face-to-face costs, which is the cost of moving people. And I'd like you to think about globalization past, present, and future. Globalization as arbitrage of goods was the old globalization, up to, say, 1990. Arbitrage of know-how or knowledge is the new globalization, which started after the ICT revolution, made it easy to move knowledge across borders and keep control of it. And future globalization, I think, is going to be in labor services as we develop very good close substitutes to face-to-face. So here we go. What I'm going to do to explain this is I'm going to go through a couple hundred years of history in about 3 minutes, or maybe 4 or 5 minutes, to explain how the development of history fits into this model, and hopefully that will give you the confidence that may allow us to use this model or this paradigm to think about the future. So, you ready? 200 history, 5 minutes? You probably don't want to take notes on this one. Okay. Old globalization was triggered by the steam revolution and 19th century peace around 1820. The cost of moving goods falls radically, cost of moving ideas and people fall much less, so we have one of the constraints falling. I like to call this the cascading constraint model of globalization, because it's going to be really important that they didn't all fall together, and the order is going to be historic. Low trade costs make high volume trade feasible, and national competitive advantage makes it profitable. So we went from a world where almost all production was bundled together at the village level. People were tied to the land because that's what people did. And if they needed any goods whatsoever, whether it was nails or candles or clothes, it had to be more or less made within walking distance. So the entire world geography was quite even. Everybody was poor, agrarian, not very far from starvation. I mean, obviously there were some kings and princes and pirates who lived pretty well, but the vast majority of people were poor because it was our target. And what the lowering the cost of trading goods did was allow production and consumption to be unbundled. And as it turned out, it was cheaper to make some things in one country than the other country, and so those countries started to specialize in it, and we got lots of trade. It became possible to buy faraway goods. That's the standard paradigm of globalization. But I would point out that this led to something important. A strange thing happens. Production clusters locally as markets expand globally to save on communication, not trade costs. So here we have, in the old days, just pre-globalization, dispersed production, where there's small world, small production facilities. Then when we get a bigger world because of trade costs coming down, we get big production facilities. Or in particular, it became worthwhile to adopt very scale-intensive techniques when you're selling to the world economy. But those techniques are very complex. And in order to coordinate that scale-intensive production, they put it all together in the same building, or at least in the same city. So the geography of industry dispersed globally while it clustered locally. It had not to do with the trade costs, it had to do with communication and face-to-face costs. But that changed everything. Microclustering ignites the bonfire of innovation and modern growth, which led to the Industrial Revolution and 19th century growth takeoff in the rich countries. So before here, think about this as blacksmiths. Each blacksmith producing for a dozen families, making nails by hand. The incentive to innovate isn't very high. And even if you do have a clever idea, it doesn't spread very far. Once all the production is clustered in very large cities and very large industrial districts, the bonfire of innovation starts going. It's really worthwhile to cut costs by innovating if you're producing for the whole world. And as the innovation starts to lead to more productivity, incomes start to rise, so it's even more worthwhile to innovate. And that's modern growth, which started essentially in line with the first wave of globalization. So the light bulbs circulating changed the world. But those were triggered by the fact that the cost of trade came down. But this led to the Great Divergence. The point was those light bulbs stayed in the G7. Innovation was created by microclustering of production because you could sell goods to the whole world. But the innovation did not spread because it was hard to move ideas. So as a consequence, the fact that the trade costs came down but the communication did not created the world that we saw, this great divergence of incomes. The new globalization is triggered by a revolution in information and communication technology, ITC. Steam revolution did the first one, ICT revolution did the second one. The ICT revolution lowers the cost of moving ideas, so now we have low cost of moving goods and ideas. And the ICT revolution makes offshoring organizationally feasible, and the vast wage differences made it profitable. So I want to stress the fact that what ICT did made it possible to outsource. So there's a company who makes business jets in Canada called Bombardier, and they make the tails of some of the jets in Mexico. Before the ICT revolution, that would have just been bonkers to think you could make the tails of jets in Mexico and ship them up to Canada and bolt them onto the plane and have the thing fly. I can see many people are my generation here who organized things before we had email. Before we had airmail. You would send out something like this a year in advance. You send out a bunch of letters. You wait till they come back. You'd have to chase them on the phone. It was impossible to think that you could produce goods in a faraway country organizationally impossible. The ICT, especially with simultaneous communication, made that possible. So the microcluster went to unbundled production, and that's the second unbundling of production. And everybody's noticed this: offshoring, outsourcing, fragmentation, foreign direct investment. But you're looking at the wrong thing. Those are the things we can measure, but it's not what changed the world. Globalization as knowledge arbitrage begins to ensure the offshore production fits G7 firms' offshore know-how with the jobs. So we went from knowledge staying at home to knowledge being offshore. So when you think about what happened in China, do not think about comparative advantage. Do not think that they joined the WTO and that allowed them to export goods that they could already have done if only the tariffs had been lower. What happened there was America, Japan, and Germany taught Chinese to do things that they couldn't possibly have done. It was a brand new combination of high-tech, low-wage. Before this, you had two options: high-wage, high-tech, or low-wage, low-tech. And up to this point, 70% of all manufacturing was done in the G7, so high-tech, high-wage won. Now, you could combine them. So you could take finished technology, move it to China, produce it with Chinese wages, and that was what changed the geography of manufacturing worldwide. But that wasn't some sort of change like the steam revolution, where all of a sudden technology started flowing from rich countries to poor countries. This wasn't a burst of caring and sharing. This is firm-specific technology brought to a particular facility with lots of efforts to prevent it from spreading. So the manufacturing miracle only happens in a handful of countries. Moreover, their manufacturing miracle ruins the possibility for the other developing countries who are still trying to do it with low-wage, low-tech. So it deindustrialized many other countries. Fortunately, it sparked a commodity super boom, which brought along a bunch of other emerging markets. But those are two very distinctive things. The ICT allowed firms to take their technology abroad. That created rapid industrialization and rapid income growth in about 6 or 7 countries, depending upon how you measure it. But those 6 or 7 countries account for almost half the world's population, so their rapid growth led to a commodity boom. That's how I want to tell the story. This idea of emerging markets is just too fuzzy. Think about it as this: globalization is knowledge arbitrage. Think about the headquarter economies, which have a high know-how to labor ratio, and therefore high wages before, and now factory economies which have low know-how to labor and low wages. And what happened with the ICT revolution is a pipeline allowed the arbitrage to move between countries where knowledge was abundant and therefore relatively cheap, to countries where it was scarce and relatively expensive. But the key is the firms could control it. This was always possible if you were just willing to give it away, but to control it is what led to that. And that, in my mind, is what led to the Great Convergence. In essence, this was a fantastic productivity growth in a handful of emerging countries who did it on manufacturing, which then triggered the commodity boom, which brought along a whole bunch of other emerging markets, and we saw this complete reorientation of the world economy. Okay, I hope you like that slide, by the way. I spent a lot of time on the slides, choosing them anyways. So now what I want to do is that's the 200 years of history. I think it took a little more than 3 or 4 minutes, but in any case. What I want to do is argue that this helps us understand some of the difficulties that globalization is having in the rich countries. And I've been giving talks all over the world the last 6 months in Jakarta, Mexico City, Beijing, very recently. Globalization is not under stress in the emerging markets. They like it. I mean, you can occasionally find people in those countries who don't, but overall, it's been a great thing for them. It's in the rich countries, the G7, where it's a bit of an issue. So I'm going to talk about how the new globalization explains the anti-globalization in many rich countries. I think there's 2 keys. First of all, new globalization breaks the monopoly that G7 labor had on G7 know-how. And that just seems unfair. That is not the globalization of the 70s and 80s or 90s. workers in GM were used to using GM's technology. Basically, GM couldn't take it anywhere else unless they moved the entire thing. So they started to think that that was their technology and act. It was the way their father was, they were. And now GM can take their technology tomorrow and move it to Mexico and pay people 1/10 of what they were making before, and that just seems unfair. Not only are you losing your job, but it just doesn't seem right. It's not the way it used to happen. It's unfair wage competition. No longer high wage, high tech, low wage, low tech. It's high wage, not high tech, low wage. And I think that's created a kind of harmony across many groups and societies in rich countries that this is something's different, something's wrong. The second is the new globalization affects economies with a finer degree of resolution. It's not sectors and skill groups anymore. So the traditional way of thinking about globalization is that it's good for some sectors and bad for some sectors. We have sunset sectors and sunrise sectors. And if you're in a country like Finland, you say unskilled workers are losers, skilled workers are winners. It's not working like that anymore. So let me use these two infographics to explain that. This is the old globalization, and this is a factory. So there's a product, manufacturing stages, and jobs. And let's say this is the US auto industry in the 70s and 80s, when Japan was the China at the time. Japan was rising very rapidly and beat the US car industries out of the American car market in a very serious way. But at that moment, Japanese competition showed up in America in the form of a car. That was it. So it was Team Japan versus Team US, and you can understand why the industry was shrinking. The whole industry shrank, it was a team effort. In the new globalization, the international competition can reach inside the factory and lead to an outsourcing of one manufacturing stage. Now, the outsourcing of one manufacturing stage actually makes the other stages more competitive because they're getting the inputs for cheaper. So this globalization is divisive inside the factory itself. And the unions, you can see, are having trouble with this. Unions are organized by sectors or skill groups or both, and the globalization is helping some of the workers and hurting other workers. It's a little difficult to do. The same with government departments and whatever. And now it's coming in to do actual jobs. So, way to summarize that, I hope you like this one. Like that's threatening. And by the way, I'll come, it's not all bad, so I'll come to that in a second, but you're supposed to be scared now, because as I understand it, when people are scared, their analytic facilities like flare up. The psychologists will tell you that. Whereas if you were all happy and you're going to sleep, not paying attention to what I'm doing. So I'll come to the good stuff later, but hold on here. So the new globalization impact is more sudden because it's driven by ICT revolution, not lower tariffs and better transportation technology, which takes decades. It's more individual because globalization is reaching inside the factory, not the whole sector. It's more unpredictable because it's a little bit hard to know what's going to go next in this world, in part because we didn't study so carefully why it was stuck together. And it's more uncontrollable because governments control people and goods crossing borders very well. They have that technology, but they do not have the technology for controlling ideas going across borders unless you're willing to rip up the whole fabric. So I believe that a lot of the problem with globalization is that there's a sense of anxiety. No matter what job or skill you have, you can't really be sure your job will be next. Especially when everybody's trying to explain to you that it was like the 70s and 80s. All you need to do is adjust, go from a sunset sector to a sunrise sector. And a lot of the people in the Midwest of the United States haven't seen that in the last 20 years. They do not see the adjustment that's been happening. Now, on the good side, globalization is today, and always has been, more opportunities for your most competitive citizens, and more competition for your least competitive citizens. Now we here have a room full of most competitive citizens, so globalization is actually offering opportunities for you. So I've been telling a negative story, but just because I wanted to scare you so you listen to me. But actually, it's been wonderful for all of you. And if you've been listening to what I've been saying, it's knowledge which has become more valuable by these changes. Whether the knowledge is clustered in a company or stuck in your head, you can leverage your knowledge on a wider playing field, and knowledge is non-rival, so you can leverage it in many places at the same time. You don't have to decide. So I think at least part of the income inequality in the rich countries, which is moved towards knowledge, the 5 most valuable companies in the world are knowledge companies. They don't make anything. Okay, now let me talk about the future, because the future is unknowable, but also inevitable. Now, the reason I put that up is because I have this bad habit of sounding like I believe what I say. I get it from teaching the undergraduates. And up to this point, I really do believe what I'm saying. But now I'm talking about the future, which by definition means I'm going to be making it up. So if I sound like I believe it, it's really to provoke you into thinking about the future. There are no answers, but I'm pretty sure that people are not thinking correctly about the future, and they most definitely aren't thinking hard enough about the future. Okay, here's my view of globalization. We're going to need a bigger vote. I think globalization going forward will be far more disruptive than the globalization that we've seen so far. I think, just to give away the punchline before I tell the joke, I think globalization is going to come to the service sector in the rich countries. People will face what looks like direct, unfair wage competition from low-wage, highly talented people sitting abroad, charging little money. How many of you telecommute ever, work from home? Just raise your hands, please. Okay. Now, let me just guess. So, if you're telecommuting from an hour or 2 away, how far? You're a bit more. Okay, so a few hours. Well, why couldn't it be 2 or 3 time zones away? So, what I'd like you to think about is, if you can do your job telecommuting, why can't some clever person earning 1/20th of your wage do it from further away? Now, not everything. Our jobs are a whole bundle of chores, some of which can be outsourced, some can't. But the technologies are advancing very rapidly. I'm going to talk about that. So you should worry about that. And I'm using telecommuting to balance my life. I'm not sure that's going to work out so well very soon. The second thing is automation, and I'm not going to talk too much about this. So automation up till now has been a story of the manufacturing sector. And the manufacturing sector is all on board for the last maybe 20, 30 years. Their jobs have been facing competition from robots at home and China abroad. But you, all who work in the service sector, even if you're in manufacturing, you're doing services, have not faced competition because computers couldn't think. So if your job involved almost any kind of thinking, anything from arranging flowers to taking care of a nuclear reactor, a computer couldn't do it. But factory work, which was mechanical, that could be automated. The other thing about globalization is that service sector has been protected by the high face-to-face cost, the third cost we talked about. Because you can't put services in a container and then ship them overseas, so you have a natural, very high barriers. Let me just make up a number. Let's say, by the way, do you know that 68% of all statistics are made up on the spot? So let me make up the statistic. That one didn't work as well as I hoped it would. Let's say it's 1,000% tariff on services because of the cost of face-to-face. Technology in the next few years will lower that by whatever amount. I have to make up another number. Let's suppose it comes down to 100%. This is in a situation where these people, you people, have never faced, maybe some of you do face competition globally, but many of the people in the service sector with back office jobs or whatever have never faced global competition, and they're about to face it very rapidly. Okay, so the idea is what happens when the third constraint on globalization is relaxed. So we have also low face-to-face. And I'm not talking about Star Trek teleportation. I'm talking about telecommunication. In particular, instant machine translation melts the language barrier. So how many of you tried online translation? Is it any good? Okay, try it again. Google last year completely changed the way they do it, and they made more progress in 6 months than they had in the previous 10 years. So I tried it this morning on Finnish, it's pretty good. Not so good on Swedish, and I'll talk about that. But just give that a thought. There's 8 million people who graduate from university in China each year. Most of them can't speak English. Very soon they will. And they, as you probably know, they're underemployed in China. They don't have enough university jobs. The second is advanced communication technology that creates close substitutes to being there. And I'll show you some examples. There's telepresence, telepresence robotics. People are talking about using augmented reality or virtual reality, holopresence. There's a number of technologies, none of which are Star Trek. It's just they're a little expensive for the moment. And also, companies are reorganizing to make remote work easier for everybody. So they're switching to matrix structures, project orientation, and they're adopting technologies like Slack or Trello, project management, which makes it easier to slot in remote workers. That is not being done to facilitate globalization, but it will facilitate globalization. As the companies make it easy for people to telecommunicate inside rich countries, they are at the same time going to make it easier to globalize that. Okay, so let's think about this. Technology is opening up a new pipeline for virtual migration, or virtual globalization. So this labor is going to go to those high-wage jobs without moving. Now, obviously, that won't be everything, but on the margin, it could be very disruptive, and I suspect it will be. All right, let's go through some examples. I want to convince you that this isn't science fiction. It's like I like to say that things have changed so much, not even the future is what it used to be. And I want to argue that the future is already here with this sort of stuff. Most of us aren't paying attention to it. So the idea is that remote work today, telecommuting, is leading to globalization of the service sector tomorrow, virtual globalization or telemigration. So this is what's going on now. This is Hollywood and Chicago. It's the one I found on the internet. I don't know why Hollywood and Chicago, but in any case, and this is international remote work where everybody's connected. And if there's not, it doesn't take a great leap of understanding to see that that's not a long step, especially when the technology is getting better. These are what I call virtual globalization websites. The largest one is Upwork. So Upwork is like an eBay for international remote work. Probably never heard of it. It's worth $5 billion now. It's about to go, it'll probably go public this year. So what it does is it handles the payments and some of the sort of certification and the work is done. It's just like eBay. They provide the mix between micro. This is the biggest one. But Fiverr's another big one, Working Nomads, Amazon, Mechanical Turk in the United States. But there's a whole bunch of them. Right now, this is this Cambrian explosion of innovation. One or two of them are going to win. There's a big Chinese one, which I don't have up here, which is the second largest one in the world. These will be the next Amazon or the next Google. And what they're doing is allowing wage arbitrage. And there's an enormous amount of money to be made in wage arbitrage because the wages are so different. So hark back to what I said, globalization is arbitrage. Now, 200 years of globalization has pretty much arbitraged most of the price differences in goods. They're not that different. There's still some money to be made. Knowledge, since this has been going on since the ITC revolution, much of the simple offshoring has been done, especially to China. And as you mentioned, it's been overbuilt and maybe oversold, but it's still going on. But the really low-hanging fruit's gone. Where there are still enormous arbitrage is in wages. And for example, if you take a professor in economics doing my job in the Philippines, he earns less than a 20th of what I earn. And he may very well have a PhD from the US or Europe as well. So, the second part, this machine translation, is no longer Star Trek. It's for real. I don't know how many of you are Star Trek fans, but yeah. Tattoo in the whole audience? Are you kidding? So how many saw this on TV, Star Trek, this episode? Oh, come on. All right. So this is where they're on trial and in some foreign place, and of course they can't understand them. So they have the universal translator to their ear. The thing's the size of an old-fashioned, transistor radio, but still. That's for real. This is what it looks like now. This is called Pilot. This is it's becoming commercially available this year, but it works on an iPhone application which you can download right now. iTranslate is very good, both verbal and also if you use your camera, you can. Like I was in Japan a couple weeks ago, and for the first time I could go into a sushi restaurant and actually understand what I was ordering. You just hold the screen up like this, and it translates it instantly into English. It's pretty good. It depends upon the major languages. But Google Translate is one. You probably don't know it, but on Skype you have an option called Skype Translator. So you can talk to somebody in Spanish while you're speaking English, and they hear you in English, they hear you in Spanish, and you hear them in English. Skype Translator is an option on which you can use right now. Most of you don't know that, but in YouTube, many of the foreign language videos, if you just go to settings and go to captions, if you do auto-translate, it will, through natural language processing, automatically translate it into captions in English. This is true right now. So instant free translation of language is not science fiction, it's very good, and I'm going to talk about, it's going to get better very quickly. Let me talk about why. So why now? The machine learning translation and machine learning revolution, that's the new thing. I was at Davos this year, and everybody said, forget about everything, think about machine learning. And if you don't know what machine learning is, go home and read up about it, because it's going to change the world. So it's based on unbelievable increments in computing power, and this is why it surprises us. So, from Apollo 11 in 1969 to the iPhone 6S, this one, was an increased computing power of 120 million times. The difference between December 2015, when this came out, and mid-2016, when the iPhone 7 came out, was another 120 million times. And between mid-2016 and the end of this year, another 240 million times will come online. And you know the math here. But the point is people hear about doubling in growth rates, but they forget about the increments. The increments are just phenomenal. And as a consequence, they've been using this to train incredibly large statistical models on language translation, which is why they can do things this year that they couldn't do in 2015, because computers weren't good enough. So this is the way I like you to think about this. This is my explanation for what's going on, the holy cow moment. There's a variety of ways of saying it, I'll say them all. So our brains evolved to understand a walking distance world. Our brains evolved to understand motion when a sphere in flight was really fast. And as a consequence, we tend to think the future is a linear extraction of today. Tomorrow's going to be like yesterday, only a little more so. So we tend to extrapolate technological trends in a straight line. But that's not how digital technology advances. It advances like this. You have imperceptible growth for quite a long time, because although it's going 100 times, it's going from 1 penny to $1. The next step is $1 to $100. And the next step is $100 to $10,000. So for a long time, when AI came out, everybody goes, oh, it's going to change everything, robots, Jetsons, will all be... Nothing happened. It wasn't very good. And now we're hitting the elbow of the exponential curve. And when that crosses the walking distance, we get what I call the holy cow moment. And if you try and translate, you'll experience holy cow moment right now. Eventually, it hits the law of diminishing returns, and it can't go on forever. But we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short run and underestimate it in the long run. And when we split, that's called a Mars law. If you flip between the two, you get the holy cow moment. And I think that's what I'm worried about with globalization. Okay, so machine translation is based on machine learning revolution plus unbelievable amounts of language data. So there are billions of paired sentences that have been put online, all UN documents translated into the 6 official languages. So if you speak one of those languages, that's going to be translated very, very well. And Google's really good at those languages, especially if you speak like a UN document. This is not going to be good on rap songs, but really all they do is Google Translate does not understand language. It has just seen a billion paired sentences and constructed a model. Start. Let me see, cancel. How do we get rid of this thing? There we go. Okay. I was tempted, I should have told Siri to turn off the timer. It would have been AI sort of thing. But in any case, the EU Parliament and the EU Commission put on another billions sentences paired, and the Canadian Parliament with all the French and English translations. So I don't know why Finnish is so good. Maybe you put the Swedish translations online, and then they did Swedish, I don't know. But in any case, these data, huge data, together with huge computing powers, changed everything. Okay, so machine translation will transform the global competition for service sector and professional job. Just to give you some numbers, today there's about 144 million gifted people in the world, counting the top 2% of the intelligence distribution. About 1/7 of them speak English, let's say that's 20 million. Soon, the other 124 million will be telecommuting into the global workplace, providing direct wage competition. So this is not comparative advantage. This is direct wage competition. They're in essence hiring a migrant in your office, paying him 1/20 of it, and with no severance pay, no contracts, no holiday leave, no contribution to the pension system, no health care. That's going to happen very quickly. So I'm going to skip over this because I think I've belabored the point enough. There's also a set of communication technologies which is going to make it easier to treat them as if they're side by side with you, even when they're on the other side of the world. So this is for real. It's called telecommunication. I suspect most of the people in this room have used telecommunication rooms. Yes? Hands? Okay. So all the high-end banks and consulting companies have them. This one's by Cisco. You know, these people will be, let's say, in New York, and those people there in Paris, and they're in, say, Mumbai. It gives people the impression that they're actually in the same room. And as a consequence, it's easier to make deals because people feel almost face-to-face. It's disruptive. It's kind of amazing how you kind of get sucked into it. And this is another version of it, which is a Telepresence robot, which is basically Skype on wheels. And people say that this gives the person on the wheels a physical presence in the office, and people start treating it differently, giving it more authority. And it's not very expensive. There's a really, I don't have time for this, but I'll tell you anyways. So there's a really great story of an online magazine called Wired.com. And there was an editor in Boston who was telecommuting into San Francisco, and she was using one of these things. And while she was talking to somebody, one of the jokers in the office picked it up from behind and shook it. And she felt violated. So now the Wirecom has rules about inappropriate robot touching. I kid you not. And actually, sometimes they have to pick up the robot and move it like someplace because it's kind of slow. So she goes offline, and once it goes offline, it's like a broomstick. So she turns off the virtual thing, and then you can touch the robot. So anyways, it makes a difference. This is hologram. The next one is Telepresence for holograms. This isn't science fiction. Mélenchon, the French presidential candidate, did it. He's in Marseille here, in Lyon there. Modi did it in 2014. This is how you can use it to coordinate on product developments and things like that. Okay, so all that's for brain services. Now let's talk about manual jobs. So before I go there, I'm staying in this hotel, thank you very much, ETLA. It's a beautiful hotel. And the people cleaning the room, they look Finnish. It's amazing to pay a Finnish person to clean a hotel room. Now all you would need is a robot controlled by somebody sitting in Kenya to control the robot to change the sheets. So much cheaper. This is what telerobotics is today. So it's a surgeon that are operating from 400 kilometers away. At the top there, these are the surgeons controlling things. Down here is a robot 400 kilometers away actually doing the surgery. Now these things are clunky and expensive. But to mainstream them, all that has to happen is electronics gets cheaper. And do you think electronics is going to get cheaper? Of course. And you need bigger bandwidth. And that's doubling every 2 years. And you need bigger processing in order to control the lag problems, all of which are coming. So in not too many years, every hotel in Helsinki will have telerobots controlled by people far away to change the bed sheets. Maybe there's certain things that some humans can't be, but that can happen. Okay, so this is what I'm worried about, the great upheaval. The new and old globalization affected trading goods sectors, which is less than 30% of the workers in most countries. Remote intelligence could affect the rest. So I think automation and globalization is coming to a whole group of people on rich countries who are not ready for it. And I think we should start worrying about how that's going to happen. Sorry, I went over a little bit, but there we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Baldwin, for your keynote. I think, wow, we have to let this sink in for a while, this tsunami. It was quite revolutionary, actually, and extremely interesting. Highly appreciated. Thank you. And a note for the audience, do not worry, we take some questions a little later on. But first we take a look at Case Finland, how Finland's economic history rides the wave of globalization, so to say. You all have a book already, I presume, by your seat. So next I welcome here one of the authors, Vesa Vihriälä, Managing Director of ETLA, please.
Thank you. There are slides. Just forward. Okay, great. Thank you, Petri, and thank you, Petri, for a wonderful presentation. It was great to listen to, and I'm afraid I disappoint you if you expect me to give the answer to how to react to these things, what are the political, appropriate political responses. As Petri said, what I intend to do in a short period while he is to discuss how this story we just heard fits into the Finnish economic history or the other way around. And I have here two main points, just two, not three. And one of them is that the fact that Finland has become a rich country over 150 years from being a very poor part of Europe is very much linked to its participation in global trade in different forms. And secondly, that this has happened not because we have been saved from many disturbances or shocks, or that because we have exceptionally favorable endowments, but rather despite of these turbulences and rather ordinary endowments. And let me start by showing you a graph of the overall economic development in four countries. Finland is with the black line, and there's the US, Sweden, and Germany. This is the real GDP per capita in comparative terms. And as you see, Finland used to be the poor country among these four for a very long period of time. At the same time, it grew quite fast throughout this period, and actually towards the end of the period reached pretty much the other European countries in terms of GDP per capita. You see the convergence a little bit better in this graph where we compare the three Europeans to the US. Until about 1930s, Finland grew more or less at the same rate as the United States per capita. So we were at about 40% of the US GDP per capita. Then there were 1930s, 1940s turbulences, and after that, in the post-war period, Finland has grown very fast compared to these countries. As a matter of fact, equally fast as Germany, which started from a very low position after the war. And throughout this period, Finland actually has been a pretty open country in terms of trade. Here you have the ratio of foreign trade to GDP, and as you can see, until the Second World War, Finland actually was more open in that sense than Sweden or Germany, not to speak about the United States. And after the Second World War, Finland's openness increased again from a low level created by the war, pretty much in the same way as in Germany and Sweden, and much faster obviously than in the United States. So what I intend to do now in a few minutes is to go through the different episodes Richard discusses in his book. The first unbundling divided into three acts, 1, 2, and 3, and then the second unbundling. And what has happened to Finland during these different episodes? When they started industrialization and globalization in Finland, Finland obviously wasn't an independent country yet. It was a part of Russia. And that was in mid-19th century. And obviously being part of Russia wasn't perhaps the best possible place to start modernizing your economy or your society. Russia wasn't known for such qualities at that time. Nevertheless, Finland had at least two advantages. One of them was that it actually had quite a lot of autonomy. It was an autonomous part of Russia, which meant that it could basically decide a lot of about its economic policies and its laws, for example. Secondly, it had Swedish, I would say, Swedish traditions rather than Russian traditions. Swedish laws, Swedish-Finnish way of interpreting them. There had been no serfdom in this country, for example. So in these two respects, Finland was in a good position to start gaining from globalization. At the same time, it started with a catastrophe in the beginning. We had a famine which killed 1/10 of the population in a couple of years in the 1860s. So what did Finland do as a country in this period? It actually used all the ingredients that you find in the first unbundling story. Greater access to markets, importation of technology, entrepreneurs in a skilled labor to some extent, building infrastructure, and using these three elements, it actually built upon the comparative advantage Finland had in producing forest industrial products, which was the main resource Finland had. And as you saw in the picture, we grew roughly the same rate, at the same rate as the rest of the Western Europe. Now, this obviously came to an end with the First World War. Again, there were some positives for Finland, including getting independence, but at the same time, the starting point was very dismal. We had the biggest economic collapse ever registered in the Finnish economic history. GDP declined by more than 30% in a couple of years of time. And that actually was largely due to the fact that we were excluded from foreign trade. We couldn't export to the West, we couldn't import from the West because of the war. And in 1917, of course, we couldn't import to Russia because Russia was in big turmoil. So there was a famine again, civil war, a very bad situation. Not a good starting point for the second period, the second act in Vesa's story, the protectionist period until the end of the Second World War. What did Finland do? A lot of the energies went to internal reforms to help feed the population and to build some reconciliation among the population with people, land reform, for example. But also there was an important element in that we tried to keep our borders open for trade and actually promote trade, even in these rather bad conditions of protectionism. And this actually did pretty well. Led again, like in the 19th century, by the expansion of forest industry and its exports, Finland grew rapidly at the same rate roughly as the rest of Western Europe. Then we came to the Second World War, which was a big shock to Finland, obviously, not as big as the Soviet Union or Poland or Germany, but nevertheless a big shock. So perhaps not the best possible starting point for the third act in the first unbundling. But nevertheless, there were some things which changed in a positive way for countries like Finland. And the key factor, obviously, here was the fact that the new world order, basically created by the United States and the other Western leading powers, were favorable for all countries that depended or wanted to depend on foreign trade. Because the new world order was pro-market, pro-free trade, and it also created institutions, political institutions, to govern these processes on a multilateral basis. Finland's strategy at that point was basically to be as much part of this process of internationalization, global economic cooperation as possible. We were constrained by the fact that we were next to a now very powerful Soviet Union, which didn't want us to participate in Western integration. And for example, we had to abstain from taking part in the master program, which helped a great deal many Western European countries. But nevertheless, we managed to get into the international organizations. We managed to expand our trade to the West. This was the first pillar of the growth strategy of Finland after the war. The second was a program actually as of paradigm of heavy investment across the board, but basically in export industries, not only in forest industry, but also in other branches of manufacturing. The third one, which started at around early 1960s, was building up a welfare state based on the examples of Sweden and the other Nordics, which have started this process early. Expanding and upgrading education was a critical point of emphasis for Finland in this regard. What did we see? We saw diversification branch-wise in our economic structure production. Not only forest industry expanding, but also metal industry expanding quite fast. There was obviously decline in the share of primary production in Finland in the favor of manufacturing in general, and then also later on services. And it was precisely this 40-year period when we saw this great convergence. This was the great convergence for Finland from the end of the Second World War until 1990, when we basically reached 70% of the US GDP per capita. Remember, it was 40% before the war. We reached almost the Swedish level, almost the German level. We were called the Japan of Europe. It was the end of the 1980s. Some of us remember that still. Because we were just in the middle of the boom created by financial liberalization. There were inefficiencies involved as well. We invested heavily, which also implied that part of the investment wasn't very efficient, implied foregone consumption. And there was quite a lot of instability in macroeconomic development. Nevertheless, it was a great period of convergence growth for Finland, the best ever recorded for such a long period of time. But that came to an end, as we know, and that came to an end for two reasons. One was pretty much the same thing that happened in Spain, Ireland, more recently, what happened in Sweden, Norway, at the same time as in Finland. We had a financial crisis created by a badly managed financial liberalization. But in the case of Finland, there was on top of this also a second big macroeconomic shock, which was the disappearance of the Soviet Union. Not the Soviet Union as such, but the trade with the Soviet Union. And that resulted in a crisis which was the biggest, or at least one of the biggest in the OECD area by that time. GDP declined by 10%, employment declined by almost 20%, unemployment increased to 17%, public finances went deeply in red. And it was a big societal catastrophe in different ways for Finland. There was, however, sort of silver lining to this crisis, which was twofold, I would say. One was that a lot of inefficiencies that had accumulated over time were eliminated at one go almost. Because many of the production that went to Russia served the domestic market were fairly low productivity activities. And given the squeeze, many of those things just were discontinued. They don't exist anymore. And the resources which were tied up with that production were free for other purposes. And the bigger thing, I think, for the longer term, for the future coming years, was a reorientation of policy. Not induced only by the crisis, but at least accelerated by the crisis. And here you can pick at least three important points. One is the greater emphasis on innovation, promotion, through more money, public money being spent on R&D. The second thing was a further opening up of the economy through the membership in the European Union, which not only improved access to the Western European market, but also increased competition in the domestic scene. And then there were also some more reforms domestically, including tax reforms that reduced distortions. All these elements are things that according to economic theory are helpful for productivity and growth. So even though we were at a very low level of activity, sort of cyclically, and there were some difficulties and processes ongoing, we were in a way at a reasonably good position when a new phase of the globalization story started. The second unbundling was unfolding precisely at the time when Finland was in this deep crisis, when it was transforming itself into a different kind of economy. And in the transformation process, Finland was obviously aided by a rather traditional means, which is a huge depreciation of the currency by more than 30%. Then we had Nokia, a company at the technology frontier in the ICT sector, precisely at the time when that particular field started to grow exponentially. And the company were able and willing to take the risk that we are involved to take advantage of these opportunities. Internationalization, outsourcing were an integral part of this growth process at that point. It was not only Nokia, but other companies outsourced production to other companies, and vice versa. Many foreign companies came to Finland and bought up Finnish companies which were relatively cheap in the aftermath of the crisis. So there was this two-way internationalization of the Finnish economy. And it all rested on the things that had been done in the past. Building up of the education system for decades, more recent investments in innovation activities, which helped to create a knowledge economy, so we were capable of putting into good use competent people. And what we saw was a very rapid productivity growth and economic growth as a whole. So even though employment increased as well, it was obviously mainly productivity that increased. We came to the sort of global frontier in many fields. In Europe, on average, goes to the same level as the Netherlands and Sweden, which were the top countries for the market sector as a whole. And in manufacturing, actually, we exceeded the US productivity level in the early years of the 2000s. So that was a great reconvergence, if you like. Unfortunately, again, this fabulous period came to an end. Again, because of the macroeconomic shock. This time the trigger was the global financial crisis, which for the most part was reason that Finland's GDP declined by 8.3% in 1 year, 2009. But that's not the biggest thing. The biggest thing was that the Finnish economy was also hit subsequently by a series of more Finland-specific asymmetric shocks. Nokia's decline in cell phone production, decline in paper demand, decline in global investment activity, which meant decline in the demand for investment goods in which Finland happens to specialize, and then also, as of 2014, decline in Russian demand. And we have had great economic difficulties ever since. Last year, 8 years since the beginning of the crisis, Finland's GDP was 4% below the level reached before the crisis. In the Eurozone, which is not precisely the most dynamic area globally, it is 4% above the level reached before the crisis. So there is this big question, why on earth a country like Finland, which just a few years earlier was considered to be one of the most competitive countries globally, struggles so badly to recover. Now, this is much less than 200 years from the French Revolution, as so implies it, so we don't know yet for sure. But I think we can easily list three things here, perhaps in the order of importance. First is that the shocks actually were very big for the size of the Finnish economy. That's one thing. And most of them were permanent. Cell phone production is not going to come back to Finland ever. And that's in the same sense that it was here previously, for example. Second, cost competitiveness did not adjust in the same way it did adjust in the early 1990s when we had the previous crisis. Now it was prevented doing so because of we don't have any own currency. And the labor market had not changed accordingly. And thirdly, and I think this is the most problematic part of the story, it is that perhaps after all, the Finnish companies haven't been capable of producing new things, completely new things for completely new markets. They have been much better in incremental innovation rather than sort of big leaps, radical innovation. And that is precisely what we might have needed in this time. So I will stop my story here and just wrap up with three points now this time. And it fits this today very well because there's another book being published today with 3 points for sure. the Finns know what I'm talking about. I think the Finnish economic history as a whole is a perfect match with the story which Paul tells in his book. Second, the fact that Finland has succeeded despite many serious shocks. I think I give you a list of many shocks so that you will be convinced, is that we have had good institutions and reasonably sensible policies over time. Yet the last episode shows that even if we have these good institutions, and they haven't really changed that different, they are so different now from what they were 15 years ago when we were so successful. Despite these good institutions and basically sensible policies, a country which aims at being a global top in productivity is subject to a lot of risks. A small country has to specialize, and when you specialize, you are subject to risk. And they just have to be handled, which means, as far as I can see, even more flexibility, even more agility, resilience, whatever you want to call it. And in this picture, I still don't have the third unbundling incorporation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vesa, for your analysis. We go straight ahead and take one more presentation. This is short and it's a sort of summary about outsourcing in Finland and Sweden. This joint Finnish-Swedish project is a collaborative research project of ETLA and KTH, that is the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. And as you have already noticed, you have another book by your seat. This one. Well, this next presentation is about that book. I welcome here Petri Rouvinen. He is one of the authors of this book, and he is also managing director of ETLA. Please.
All right, thank you, Petri. So indeed, as Petri said, in fact, both books today and Richard's visit here are part of the InSource project, so a joint effort with ETLA and the KTH in Stockholm, and Stockholm as well. I'm hearing a lot of echo from my phone. So InSource project does the hashtag for this effort, and it has been kindly supported by Tekes and Vinnova, for which we are very grateful. And although I will be the talking head here, I think I need to point out my colleagues that are largely and mostly responsible for the work here. There's Jyrki Aliuk is back there, and then Jonas Tuhkuri is there as well, and Mika Maliranta being changed to the computer since he does all our calculations. So it's too expensive to move to these occasions, but Mika as well has been a central person here. And at KTH, the effort has been led by Hans Löf, and Hans will be in the panel shortly after this. But a few numbers. If you look at Finland and Sweden, about 1/3 of business sector employment directly serves global value chains in its day-to-day jobs. 40% of gross exports in both countries actually consist of imported inputs that are then re-exported. In Finland, about 40%, and in Sweden, about 50% of corporate employment is actually abroad. And if you look at business sector value added, in Finland about 20%, and in Sweden about 30%. Of that value added created nationally is actually provided by foreign-owned units. These are all pretty large numbers, and they are actually among the several hundred numbers we have in this book, and they all go into showing how deeply engaged Finland and Sweden are in these global value chains, and indeed not only Finland but also Sweden is really so almost a textbook case of the story Richard has been telling us about. So what we do in the book, so Richard sort of had global story. Vesa told Finland's story, but it was largely a macro story. We go into deeper to the same phenomenon. So we look at global value chains, sort of the key animal to be chased here, and we look at offshoring and reshoring, which is basically the movement of these activities across national borders. And we look at the more macro level, which in this case is like a fairly aggregate industry level, and then we go to very micro. In the case of companies, we eventually go to individual products and services, and we also look at individual job and even task level. So this is basically the simple way to organize the book. And besides our InSource effort, I should mention Rouvinen, which is a sister project under the same umbrella, led in Finland by Vihriälä. Where are you, Jussi? Over there, Tampere University of Technology, and in Sweden, led by Jorma Ollila at Lund University. So, among other things, Jussi, Jan, and people in the teams find that, in fact, both offshoring and reshoring are rather prevalent in Finland and Sweden, but that if you compare the two, they are actually much more balanced in Sweden. So there's more equal flow of activities going out of Sweden and actually activity returning to Sweden. Among other things they do, they look at what are the drivers of offshoring. This shows that in the case of Finland in the order of importance, but the picture is largely similar for Sweden. So perhaps expectedly, cost considerations are the main drivers for moving activities out of Finland and Sweden. So indeed, sort of playing that arbitrage game. And if you look at the reverse, what causes multinational corporations move business functions back to Finland or Sweden, on top of the list you find flexibility, quality, lead time, logistics cost, and access to skills and knowledge locally. I think we return to these issues in the panel. In my remaining time, I will talk about sort of the intersection of globalization and innovative activity, which is obviously one angle to the knowledge and knowledge arbitrage Richard talked about. So, in fact, as was inferred before, if you look at outsourcing and offshoring and geographical dispersion, it concerns more manufacturing industries and services, and when you go into manufacturing, it mostly concerns the fabrication or direct production stages than other stages or functions within manufacturing. So in fact, if you look at innovative activity, it has certainly gotten more dispersed geographically, but by and large, it's actually still taking place at the home economies of multinational corporations, and indeed, there's reasons to believe that might be about to change, but as of now, it's a fact that especially the most strategic aspects of innovative activity tends to be close to the home base. So Richard talked about multinational corporations that basically take knowledge created in the north and exploit that in the south, so to speak. Well, an aspect you did not emphasize is that in the process of this, so outsourcing and offshoring, knowledge concerning how you manufacture or fabricate something, it has become shared. Not intentionally, but nevertheless the outcome is that knowledge on a fabrication stage is shared, increasingly shared globally, and that means that the economic value added derived from that stage has diminished. So a reaction that many of the Western manufacturers companies have taken is that they basically move to services from their manufacturing base. Another consequence of this, shall we say, almost trivialization of some aspects of fabrication is that in relative terms, innovative activity has become much more important in terms of defining where value added is created and captured. And obviously we talk loosely about innovative activity and R&D, but when you look closely, for instance, R and the D in R&D, research and development, are rather different. So the development part is much more prone to geographical dispersion. And if you look at what determines the locations of the R part and the D part, they are different. So the R part typically seeks top local talent, obviously, but it also needs actually relatively large, world-class urban environment that's attractive per se, but are also of the type that you can bring international recruits to that environment that they are likely to enjoy. And obviously, being in the proximity of suitable universities, and suitable here sometimes means field, but it also means that universities need to be entrepreneurially oriented in the sense that they do want to interact with corporations. If you look at the B part, it's much more focused on the local market size when locations are being decided on, and obviously cost factors as well are more important. We go rather deep in looking at the co-location of direct production activities and R&D in this book. And in fact, what we find that sometimes we have skin-tight coupling and then complete irrelevance of co-location even within the same narrowly defined industries. So generalizing on the tendencies of co-location is certainly a dangerous business, but what seems to be true on average that despite fears in many countries, home R&D per se does not seem to follow production with the offshore location, although you can certainly find examples of that, but as a rule that's not the case. But then again, if you look at where R&D activities are ramped up in terms of putting new investment into them, that's often in the location where the corporation happens to be active also in terms of production. So at the end, you sort of have the same concern of R&D following production, although it's not always through the most obvious route. We also look at innovation jobs. If we simply look at the task composition of innovation jobs, in principle they seem fairly offshoreable. So a large fraction of them could be observed simply if one makes that analysis on the basis of the task composition. But when we look at the realization, relatively little, at least compared to production, relatively little of that innovation job offshoring actually takes place. Now, why is that? Well, in the case of Finland and Sweden, three things seem to be apparent. And one of them is that in these jobs, Finland and Sweden are actually not so high-cost locations. I mean, cost may be higher, but especially compared to geographies in the world where you find similar overall conditions, we are not such high-cost geographies. And in many industries in Finland, you have very vibrant local ecosystems, and what that means in practice, if you are located in these geographies, your people and teams working in innovative activity are going to be more productive since they get good interaction and inputs from their immediate environment. And last but not least, it's definitely true that in Finland and Sweden, corporations have much better chance in protecting their corporate knowledge and holding on to their trade secrets as compared to places like China, definitely, but even to many locations, for instance, in the United States. So we also look at some policy issues and sort of bundle those under a few headings. And you can find more discussion of these in the book. But indeed, this all concentrates now on the innovative activity. And we find that in order to be attractive location for multinationals, innovative activity, you actually need to have an internationally well-connected, well-functioning city-level innovation ecosystem. And indeed, if you look at simply numbers, we see that especially the R part in R&D, when you see movements across borders globally, they often tend to concentrate to relatively few megacities worldwide. And it seems like Stockholm is just big enough to be on this megacity list, and Helsinki is just on the borderline whether we actually have enough critical mass to be attractive in this respect. Well, consistent with the first point is that nation states should have active conscious policies in attracting and keeping high potential individuals of foreign origin. Now, this is certainly something that Finland has struggled with over the years, and we are currently struggling with this in the context of startup visas, and this is something that Sweden has certainly done somewhat better. Innovation policy, well, innovation per se is definitely more important for corporations and nations. And it seems like by extension there would be more need for innovation policy at the national level. But it turns out that when you look at into more detailed innovation policy, it's a bit of a paradox. Because historically, as sort of Richard pointed out, the assumption was that you produce where the innovation activity was done, and if that's not the case, the challenge is innovation policy. And we discussed some more practical things to do in this domain in the book. And I think I conclude there in the interest of time. So thank you.
Thank you, Petri. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to start talking. So we are a little bit behind our schedule, so I'll ask our panelists, please come up here and put on the microphones. And after that, I will give the microphone to you, in case you have some remarks or questions about Finland, about globalization, well, about anything that comes to your mind. But first, let me introduce to you a couple of new faces here. We have Elina Björklund, CEO of Reima. Welcome. Thank you. Reima is a Finnish children's outerwear brand, very well known in Finland actually. And welcome also Professor Hans Löf from KTH, Royal Institute of Technology, Stockholm. Welcome again our keynote speaker, Professor Baldwin, and the panel discussion will be chaired by our very own Vesa Vihriälä. Please.
Thank you, Petri. So, as you said, we are a little bit behind our schedule, and we have to be very brief in our interventions from now on. We will proceed in such a way that we give first floor to Elina, because she has a rather different point of view as a corporate leader in a business which is very competitive globally, and nevertheless it seems that they have succeeded pretty well. So I would ask you first to comment the opportunities and challenges that we have seen here of the current state of globalization for companies like yours. And then following that, Hans Löf will provide his points of view. I suppose they will be the Swedish points of view. on the globalization issue, outsourcing issue. You were part of the team that put together the second book we published today. And then finally, Richard will have a chance to comment everything that has been said so far. And then hopefully that has been short enough that we can have a lively discussion after that. We can spend a little more time than we have had in the program, but not very much. So please, Elina, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk here. So Reima is a book example of what Mr. Baldwin told today, and I was asked to tell about that story and especially concentrate on the digital world that we live in and how I see well going forward. And I would also like to tell that for Reima this kind of an environment is an opportunity, definitely. And why that I will elaborate to you. Going back to Reima is that we are globally leading branding kids outerwear. Reima is all about joy of movement. So our mission is to get kids out no matter what the weather, everywhere in the world. We believe that if kids are active, they turn into better adults to be. So that's what Reima is about. 7 billion products are sold today this year, out of which 80%, more than 80% into international markets. We have doubled the net sales during the past 5-6 years, and 15% come from own e-commerce. We took digital and e-commerce as the center of the strategy already in 2012. Last year, we launched Reima Ball, which is the world's first activity center for kids together with Suunto. And actually, it's not about measuring, it's about encouraging kids to be active. Joy of movement is what Reima is about. And as we all Finns know, it's about a good product, really good quality product, and that is actually the core of the story. 1944, Reima was founded in Tampere. We started to make clothing out of army leftovers, snowsuits. So the brand DNA is there. Durable materials, harsh weather conditions. 60s, 70s, Reima had thousands of workers, many factories in Finland. After the collapse of the Soviet trade, mid-90s, someone was forced to move the production to Asia. The first unbundling happened. And actually, it's the wisest decision someone made in Reima's history. I said that that's the only reason why Reima actually survives today, or is there today. Then power core of the company moved from production to supply chain management to B2B sales, being now after 2011, as we were bought by a private equity company. Riverside, a US-based private equity. We have changed the strategy and now integrating vertically towards direct to consumer. And this decision was made for 3 reasons. One is that our product, even though it's very good quality, to stay relevant, we need to listen to what consumers say. Secondly, we needed a power balance towards the trade, our biggest customer and still the biggest distribution channel. And third, and maybe the most important, we saw this going digital and decided that we need to be with it. I've used analogy of marketplace. The world has turned into a marketplace. By a click on your phone, you actually are virtually in a marketplace, where today's supply is basically indefinite. If we go back to this village that you also showed, about back to the village and marketplace there, people went to the marketplace. There were 2 functions. One was shopping and the other was socializing. Seeing and being seen, but the other one was purchasing goods. You probably had 4 potato booths, or 4 sellers of potato. Demand was defined by supply and physical proximity. You trusted the potato sellers, and most likely they were gatekeepers that had inherited their booth places from their families. So the structure was pretty simple, not complicated at all. What happens now is that by clicking on our phone, we are in a virtual marketplace. Basically, there are hundreds, if not thousands of millions potato sellers next to each other with exactly the same product. And we all know as supply curve shifts, what happens to price? Go down. And this is one of the trends that is ongoing in consumer goods and will continue. It will be about scale, big part of the consumer goods. And this is about the commodity part. And what has in a sense happened is that a big chunk of value has been transferred from companies to consumers. And the power has been transferred from companies to consumers. Now they decide what they do. So actually, demand defines supply. Totally different way. And what is interesting here, why this is a good environment for Reima when we talk about scale, is that thank God there are consumers who don't want to eat commodities every day. We go back to this potato example and the old village with 4 potato sellers. One sells for 3, one for 4, one for 5, one for 6 euros. There is this commodity, and you go into this old marketplace with the 4 potato sellers. So who do you go to? You see them next to each other. Many of us would go to 3 euros, the price. But as consumers have the power now to decide, they have different needs and different behaviors. This is what we need to understand as a company. There will always be the one who is willing to pay €1 more for the organic potato, which hopefully tastes better than the commodity. There will always be the one who is ready to pay €1 more to get those potatoes peeled and washed, maybe even delivered to your home. And there is always that bunch of people who is ready to pay €5, for €6, or that the potatoes are put in the golden box, the commodities. This is the luxury that we talk about. So there will be this differentiation going forward. And now that when you go to this marketplace and you don't know about it, it's a new city. You enter and you go to the marketplace, you go and see these potato sellers. What do you do if you wonder that, where should I buy? You usually go to your peer. You look for a person that looks kind of like you, and you go and ask her, where would you buy? And maybe Richard would recommend me to buy, not the golden box, but maybe the organic one, let's say so. So I trust you, instead of trusting the gatekeepers that used to be there in the old world, the potato sellers. They start to trust each other. And what happens in today's world? Now we go back to the virtual marketplace that platform companies like Amazon, Google, Alibaba are offering us. We are all on that marketplace, can see the full transparency, we can see the supply, all the supply, everything is transparent. So there is place for these organic differentiators. It is not a big market, but there is a place. There is place for these who bundle services into the product and the ones who wrap it into golden paper and get a bigger money for them. But what is interesting is that in this marketplace, the recommendation is also transparent and real. If you go to Amazon and today type in children's jacket, you get thousands of them. But how do you filter them? Most of the people filter them according to recommendations. So actually we go back to the roots of substance, real substance and real knowledge. There is a place for a real good product in this world. And this is interesting for companies like Reima, who really has a good product, just to get it seeded out to this place. But on the other hand, what is happening in the market is that then we have the big bulk, which is the commodity potato, that will be like 80% of the market. Then we have these differentiators who put in services, organic or golden paper. What happens in the middle? Nothing. There will be a big hole in the middle. If you have a mediocre product or medium price, there is no life. So there will be very cheap, very big volume, good enough products, and then good ones at the top. And this is where we live in consumer goods. And my question actually to the panel is also that could this happen in the labor markets? that you have commodity, people, or jobs. Let's talk about jobs. You have the premium ones. A premium product is about that you have to prove your technical superiority all the time. And then you have the luxury, which is not about pricing, because everyone wants some people, no matter what the price, Zlatan or whatever football players. And what happens when the power goes to consumers? So in this case, employees, most likely the talented ones, the premium ones, who go around in a virtual world and they can choose. Your slide said that it could be your job, but for us as a company, no matter what corporate company or brand I have, it could be my employees going to the other company, or for countries, no matter what country you have or country brand you have, could be your citizens choosing something else. So this is my penny to the discussion about the digitalization. Thank you.
Thank you, Irina. There was a clear question, the two of you. So Hans, why don't you start and then we go to Petri.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the possibility to collaborate with the Finnish data using comparing Sweden and Finland and see all the interesting similarities and dissimilarities. I will go back to that in a while, but first I will try to respond to your highly interesting question. This is exactly what's happening in the labour market. Has been happening for the last 20 years. So there's an increasing demand of skilled labour, and there's increasing demand of simple service jobs. But the middle people are disappearing. So this is happening in the US, it's happening in the US, I guess it also will happen in China. So the mediocre products and mediocre prices is exactly what already happens on the labour market. So it was highly interesting to see your management perspective on the same issue. I will take the opportunity first to say a few words. First about a comment to the very excellent presentation by Richard, and it's about thinking correct about the future. It's the big challenges. I would say that as a researcher, thinking correct about the history is even a tough challenges. But I was missing something in your presentation, and it is the challenge in the future that is related to climate change. Because everything that we have learned about trade, globalization might also be challenged by what will happen in Pakistan, where we can see that the quality of water is poor already, so perhaps 50 million people have to move. In Bangladesh, part of China, and other places. So that's my question to you. But before that, I would say that Sweden and Finland are so similar in many respects. Our two countries were among the poorest countries in Europe in the end of the 19th century and have been growing. So Sweden and Finland was the fastest productivity growth between 1880 to 1990s. Finland a bit higher than Sweden, but two countries went from very poor situation to very rich. And Sweden reached its peak in 1993, where we were the third richest country per capita in the world. And this is, we have never reached this position, and then we went down. But what happened, the reason in Sweden why our journey was that we had a lot of big companies like Volvo, Scania, Saab-Scania, Astra, Saab, Electrolux, Pharmacia, SKF, Ericsson. Most of them have disappeared or left Sweden. Volvo is now a Chinese company. Ericsson is struggling, have more problem as Nokia. AstraZeneca is in Delaware, mostly in the United States. Saab closed down its factory a couple of years ago, and so on. And Sweden had also a very deep economic crisis in the beginning of the 90s, and similar to Finland, we are in the service industry. But we can see that the manufacturing industry is still very important, and as we write in the report, 50% of the value added in exports is actually coming from the service sectors. They are consultancy, ITC, law, whatever. So they are playing an important role, and perhaps even more important. And we have been able also to create new companies like Skype, Spotify, HM, Klarna, Clas Ohlson, IKEA, and so on. So we've been through this process. Things are always continuously changing, and so the challenge is to adapt to the change. And then what we takes 2 minutes just. So what we ended our project together with Finland, we went down from the macro level to micro level, and then we are looking at what's happening at the firm level. And then we are trying to understand how important is offshoring for firms. And then we are using a study where we have all manufacturing firms with about 10 employees. And then we're looking which are the determinants to offshore and which is determinants to the rates, to the intensity of offshoring. And it is all the good things. High skill level, R&D, innovative, size of the firm, large market. It's the good companies that are also tend to offshore more. And then we're looking at what is the impact, because the main challenges of offshoring in the debate is employment, but also what happened with the productivity and wages. And what we can see that those firms, there's a positive correlation, highly significant correlation with these group companies. The more they are offshoring, the better the effect will be on TFP, as we expect. But we can also see that it has a positive impact on the employment. And what's happening in employment is that the firms tend to change employment, so they are increasing the demands of skilled labor, and then they are, in this case, reducing the non-skilled labor. So my issue and my contribution was actually to give you a possibility to respond to the climate change.
Okay, please, let's go ahead.
So I have a really good answer on climate change. I don't know. And I'm willing to make it up on a lot of stuff, but not on that. It's important, I would point out, what I'm worried about is driven by explosive growth. Climate change is driven by normal growth. And I think it's something to matter, but in the next 3 to 5 years, climate change is what we should focus on most, I think. To come back to your question, I think Hans gave the right answer about what actually is happening in the middle and the housing out of the skill. But I would suggest that that really had a lot to do with the fact that all those workers were involved in making things. And this outsourcing, the second unbundling, essentially commodified fabrication, and that undermined some of the middle skill type things. Whereas the manual workers were protected by high face-to-face costs, and the high-end service workers were competitive globally. And what I'm suggesting is that when the face-to-face costs come down, both the manual workers and the high-end workers will face competition that they have not faced before. And automation will come to both the manual jobs and to the high-end service sector jobs. So I think what happened in the middle is going to happen at the end as well. And why it happened in the middle to a large extent was because they made stuff rather than do stuff. And now we all do stuff, and that's going to happen. It happened to us as well. So I want to keep it short.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So now we have time for discussion, and I'll take questions and comments in a bunch of 2 or 3, and then each of the others have a chance to respond. Oh, there is the first one. Please wait for the microphone. Second one over there. Third one anywhere. Okay, please start. Oh, there. There's the microphone already. So
okay. So just a quick question. Vesa's presentation nicely highlighted the importance of liberalization of finances in the 90s crisis in Finland. I didn't hear very much about that. It's very much about Richard's presentation was focusing on the kind of production process and improvements in the production process. Very kind of labor-centric view on the kind of 200 years history. But there is some kind of decoupling of financial global sphere with the production. I would like to hear any ideas of what is financial kind of development there is in this.
okay, very good. Then there is another one.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the very good presentations and interesting presentations. And I'm Matti Mannerla from technology industry, Richard about, you told us about this virtual migration, which would strengthen the skilled people jobs in the Western world. And you said that machine translation is the key to of this migration. But how about the AI, artificial intelligence, which is much more than just translating the language? I mean, that is, how do you see that as a threat for the skilled people in the Western world or anywhere in the world, actually?
Yes, Tekes and Prime Minister's Office. I have a question. Well, also thank you all for very interesting presentations, but I have a question for Professor Baldwin about Jorma Ollila mentioned in his opening words that the growth of trade has diminished recently, and it has been growing slower than GDP, and that has been kind of a puzzling thing for many people. So how do you link that phenomenon to your theory on the evolvement of globalization? Does it fit your picture, and if then what is your explanation?
Please, I think these are Richard.
Sure. So let me go quickly over finance. I have a more extensive version when I do a little less simplification to clarify. I talk about goods, services, people, capital, and know-how. And I left off capital and services. So capital, I'm less worried about because I think it has been arbitraged. I think we're almost in a world where capital is not scarce. Of course, there are always companies who need some money that they can't get, especially if they're small. But the cost of funding in pure financial capital is not that different anywhere in the world, and it's not really a major constraint. The OECD has started talking about knowledge-based capital, where there's capital bundled together with knowledge. So I don't focus much on the globalization. The other reason I don't focus on it is because you need an entirely different set of modelizations and skills where you have banking crises, financial crises, exchange rate crises, the whole banking sector, information acts differently. So I left that aside. That's one of the choices I had to make. The AI is definitely, of the two, AI is the immediate one. The implementation of AI to replace service sector jobs is going on right now. If you've never heard of it, look up robotic process automation. One of the leading companies is Blue Prism. It's now worth almost $1 billion, hasn't yet gone public yet. But what it essentially does is like a computer as a player piano. So a lot of workers are involved in a knowledge assembly line where they can open up emails or websites, they take information, they put it here, combine it with other information, and then you move it down the line. And this robotic process automation is a super program that runs the programs that they are using in exactly the way they're doing it. So it takes over what they're doing, and you can replace lots of workers doing these jobs. That's happening. It hasn't caught on, but it's happening. So that's the really big threat. But if I've had more time on AI, what I'd like to point out is that it's not really artificial intelligence. It's almost intelligent. If you read carefully what's going on, especially the machine learning translation, is it's pattern recognition. It's database pattern recognition, nothing more, nothing less. So if you have a very large data set where the issues are well defined and the outcomes are well defined, this thing is going to replace those chores very fast in the next few years. If you're doing something that doesn't have this big data set in it, it will take much longer, and there's no such thing as general intelligence now. So just to give you one of my favorite examples, this AlphaGo computer that Google bought that beat the world's best Go champion, which is a game which is several orders of complexity beyond chess, and they beat the best world's player. And the designer of that was asked if the board was 30 by 30 instead of 29 by 29, what would have happened? And he said it would have been completely lost. It would be completely wiped out even by reasonably small players. So this is not an intelligent machine, but it started with 75 million board positions, divided itself in two, and played it to the end for 6 months,
thereby doing 6 lifetimes worth of experience in 6 months and found the patterns. You have to think hard about what AI can and can't do, and I think that's really the way forward if you're preparing policy for your children, is to figure out what AI can do and make sure you're not competing with that. And even better yet, maybe find a way that you can leverage it into helping something. So thank you for asking that question. The title of the next book is The Robotics Revolution. Because I think globalization and robotics are driven by the same digital laws. They are happening at the same fast. And almost everybody's talking about AI, not remote intelligence. So I think you need to talk about AI and RI. But thank you for that ability to reply.
Just one more question.
Oh, one more. So the slowdown. So the way I think about that is very much like the Kuznets cycles in the 19th century. So there was another big example where globalization led to a movement of the sources of comparative advantage rather than allowing exploitation. And that was the big migration from Europe, where there was too many farmers and too little farmland, to the Americas, where there was too much farmland and not enough farmers. And Simon Kuznets, a famous American economist, studied this and found that there was 20 to 30 year waves where they would build railroads which would turn desert into farmland. Farmers would come, they'd grow too much, the commodity would crash, and the whole thing would go down. For a few years, it was in recession, and then they start building the railroads again. And I think what we've seen in the first wave of offshoring and outsourcing is it got overbuilt, and we see a temporary collapse now. But when you ask yourself, is it over? Think about globalization as arbitrage, and ask yourself, are the know-how to labor ratios anywhere near equal around the world? And the answer is no. And as long as the answer is no, and the pipeline is open, the arbitrage will continue. I just think we got overbuilt and there was a crash. Also, we did the super easy stuff. The low-hanging fruit is gone. China was such an obvious thing. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Richard. I think we have time for one more round. There's Petri over there.
My name is Petri Vihriälä. Thank you for insightful and invigorating talks. Now, combining these two, so combining Professor Baldwin's view on the waves and what is in ahead of us, and then the development of 2 nation states, Sweden and Finland. What comes to the intersection? So, what is the role of nation states going forwards? What are the public-private partnership forms? And what are the activities in different sectors which would be of paramount importance for countries and then people and different companies in those countries to really take most out of these very interesting times in the past?
Jan von Gerg, Nordea. Thanks for very interesting presentations. I'd like to introduce politics to the play. We have already seen that services have been lagging in many free trade agreements. So if this loss of jobs is really happening, and in light of what we've already seen in the US, that what kind of president they elected, what kind of risk do you see that before we see the more positive impact, there's at least the need for a change and the short-term negative impacts that you do see increasingly people turning against globalization, electing governments that close the borders or at least stop this kind of migration of jobs that you described in the third phase. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think we have to close the round now, but don't worry, there is plenty of time to discuss over champagne. So, Richard, you have 2 more questions here, and then you have the Hans will move at this point.
Okay, on the nation state, one of the big themes in my book is the denationalization of comparative advantage. Comparative advantage as a concept is defined at the nation level by convenience, and we still talk about Germany being a high-tech company, or countries, or Finland being a high-tech company. But the truth is, it's German firms who have the high-tech, and now they have the ability to leverage their knowledge with Polish workers as well as German workers. And that has denationalized the whole issue of comparative advantage, and that's a lot of policy mistakes are still thinking that comparative advantage is a national thing, and national competitive policies promote the nation as a whole, and eventually that'll be good for everybody. So in the book, I have a whole chapter on what it means for developing country policies, and one of the big things I think we have to think about is stickiness as well. Basically, government policy promoting competitiveness has been enhancing factors which give you an edge in the world, whatever they were. And one of the primary ones has a big spillover is R&D. I think we have to add another dimension into that there's a big spillover so industry won't do it, but it also has to stay national. And R&D is not one of those. I mean, statistically it's more concentrated, but for instance, you should think about your government subsidizing stuff which will then be moved abroad to help Polish workers, not Finnish workers. So that's the stickiness of the policy you're promoting, I think you got to worry about. The nation state, fundamentally, nations are still closed. Even the most open of nations, vast majority of what you do is local and closed because you spend all your money on really, really local things. So the government's role doesn't really change in this. The government still have to educate the kids, build the roads, keep the courts, and police the roads. That stuff doesn't really fundamentally change. It's only a slight dial on competitiveness policy, I think. Politics. So the backlash we see now is against the old globalization, and it's their elected politicians who view this as 20th century globalization, and their solutions are to raise the cost of living goods, all of which are wrong, and many of them are being reversed because they realize how quickly they are wrong in a world of global value chains. But what I'm talking about is a neo-Luddite backlash. I think by the midterm elections in the US, and definitely by 2020, people won't be talking so much about the wall in Mexico and Islamic terrorism. They'll be talking about technology taking jobs and virtual workers creating unfair competition by international telecommunication. I think there will very soon become a harmonic where everybody realizes these disruptions are driven by technology, not the Mexicans, or the Poles, or the Turks, or whoever. So what I see is a big political backlash, but against technology, in some sense. And you can just imagine, by the way, it wouldn't have been the first time in history, but you can just imagine the rhetoric of wage competition, or white-collar robots taking jobs but not paying welfare benefits. You can imagine these things have essentially marginal cost of zero. AI is a program, it's just a computer program that you run. And that has essentially wages at zero, and on top of it's doing benefit competition. It's not just undermining your wages, it's undermining your workplace rules, health, safety, privacy standards, the welfare system based on jobs. All that's being eroded as well by the AI. And once somebody starts raising that harmonic, I think it will catch on very rapidly because, as I was saying, this RPA and the replacement by more sophisticated forms of AI, that's just happening incredibly fast, but people viewing it as strange little stories on the internet. Oh, they did this. Oh, they did that in law. They did this in medicine. They did this in journalism. But those stories are all the same stories, and once somebody puts it together as a political narrative, I think it will take off. So I'm not worried anymore about globalization backlash. I'm worried about the technology backlash.
Thank you. Now, Elina has very brief comments.
Yes, just a brief comment on the nations and roles of countries. From a corporate perspective, in this case, for us, the national boundaries actually has not been anything else during the past 5-6 years, but regulations, different regulations on these products, maybe language, but even that barrier has been overcome. Where I see national governments now taking role is data flows, that they are starting to, let us take Russia or China, so they are starting to fence their marketplaces so that data doesn't flow out, or you have to have your IT systems in different countries, different way. And that I see as the fifth thing on your list of knowledge people, that what happens with data.
Arbitrage has to do with heterogeneity, and there seems to be a lot of heterogeneity going on all the time since the Industrial Revolution started. So that will continue even in the most digitalized economy. So I think there will be the possibility to continuously utilize this arbitration. But nation seems to matter. Looking at Europe, there's a heterogeneity across nations in Europe. You can see Sweden on one side, we have the highest level of employment ever, and no country, even in Austria, has high level of employment due to all the development of ICT, digitalization, robotisation, and so on. So it seems to be that it's possible to simultaneously increase the employment with the technological level, the technological development, and so it has so been since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. But of course, there are a lot of challenges. But as a major threat, I cannot really see it based on economic history.
Okay, thank you very much. We end with this positive note that even though it's painting sort of very dangerous picture here based on AI and everything, very dramatic things, Hans just said that in the past it never has happened, this problem with sort of end of work. It hasn't happened in the past, so it's not going to happen in a week or two or maybe a year. Anyway, we will stop here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard, in particular. Thank you, Elina. Thank you, Hans. Thank you, Petri. And thank you, everybody here who has participated. We can now continue our discussion in the lobby. There's some refreshment for us.
Yes, there are some bubbles waiting for you. So thank you all for participating in this seminar. Thank you.